Shalom. First and foremost, call Halal Yamla, Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem HaRachak Wadash. Double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders of Great Millstone that I learned this truth from. And also peace and salutations to the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. This video I'm going to be responding to another article from the Newsbreak app. And as you see, the source of this article is from Better America. All right, and as you see, the title of the article, it says, quote, "The End of Empire." All right, it says Trump's Iran offensive triggers Suez moment as China takes the lead. The damage is irreversible. All right, and as this article goes into, it says President Donald Trump's decade-long ambition to dismantle the Iranian regime has culminated in a 6-week conflict that critics warn is exposing American fragility rather than projecting strength. All right, and as we've been seeing over these past 6 weeks and counting, all right, since the beginning of this whole Iran war between the United States and Israel versus Iran, okay, we've seen that that the United States military, along with Israel's military, is not prepared for the strength of Iran's military. Okay, as Iran, as there's all kinds of information that you can look up. All right, that state that pretty much shows that Iran has been preparing for war with America for about I believe over 20 years, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, ramping up their military, ramping up their weaponry and their military intelligence. Okay, for over 20 years, prepared to basically preparing for the United States, Babylon the Great, to eventually wage war with Iran. All right, all on behalf of the small hats, of course. Okay, and as we've been seeing over these past 6 weeks, since the United States and Israel has been waging war with Iran, we've seen that America, okay, is has underestimated Iran. Okay, they were more than underprepared to wage war with Iran. Okay, America doesn't have, first and foremost, America doesn't have enough troops out there, within the so-called Middle East region to wage war with Iran. All right, nor does America have a strong enough navy to combat Iran's, military power. Okay, nor does America have the logistics to, to wage war with Iran. Okay, because not only has Iran been preparing, for decades to wage war to eventually, defend itself against the West, against America. All right, but as well, we've also seen within these past few weeks that Iran is more than prepared to, pretty much go the distance against America. Okay, which America, wasn't prepared, for America is not prepared for a long distance war against a country like Iran, because pretty much, they thought that they would just go into Iran, bomb a few, take out, a handful of leaders, right? Bomb a few buildings, bomb a few schools, and pretty much Iran would, throw up the white flag and surrender. Okay, but as we see, it's been a complete opposite. All right, as we've been seeing a lot of, the United States military bases throughout the so-called Middle East being bombed and destroyed, right? Not being able to protect, U.S. allies within the so-called Middle East, nor being able to protect, okay, particular U.S. interests within the so-called Middle East region, because they've all been bombed and destroyed by Iran. Okay, I believe 13 bases, 13 American military bases have been bombed and destroyed throughout the so-called Middle East, if I'm not mistaken. But, all in all, okay, this war between the United States, Israel versus Iran has exposed many flaws within not only the U.S. military, but also Iran. Okay, the Iron Dome has been penetrated, right? Israel's military is looking weaker and weaker as this war goes on. Okay, and not to mention the military of America has been looking weaker and weaker as this war continues to linger. And it's all altogether backfiring against, the West, primarily the Edomite here in America, and as well the small hat. And as it continues to say, President Donald Trump's decades-long ambition to dismantle the Iranian regime has culminated in a 6-week conflict that critics warn is exposing American fragility rather than projecting strength. As the war transitions into negotiations largely brokered by Beijing, China, the United States finds its global authority and the dollar supremacy under unprecedented unprecedented strain. Okay, because this war not only is this current war making America weak, but it's also pretty much weakening America's influence and dominance throughout the earth. As these other nations throughout the world are seeing, pretty much seeing that America's military is not as strong as it always boasted itself to be. Okay, and not to mention that that's also bringing major effects upon the power of the dollar as well. Okay, because for so long time, for these past few decades, of course, one of the major reasons why America, Babylon the Great, has been so dominant throughout the four corners of the earth is, of course, number one is military, all right, and number two is dollar, all right, the petrodollar, which the petrodollar has been backed by the U.S. military, but now as we see the U.S. military being exposed more and more as this current war continues to linger, all right, that's also exposing the dollar more and more as well, which has been backed by the U.S. military. Okay, and it continues to read. It says the offensive, fueled by a hard sell from Israeli Prime Minister, all right, Bibi Netanyahu, was intended to kneecap Tehran before it could threaten the Strait of Hormuz. Instead, the administration's miscalculation has triggered what historians call a Suez moment, referencing the 1956 crisis that effectively ended Britain's era as a global superpower. All right, it says while the 1956 crisis saw the U.S. act as the quote-unquote adult in the room to restrain European imperialism, that role has now shifted to China. Recent reports indicate that Beijing, not Washington, successfully persuaded Iran to accept ceasefire terms. Okay, because Iran, pretty much Iran is at a point to where they're not looking to make any more peace deals with Babylon the Great America or the small heads. Nor were did they intend to initiate a ceasefire with America. Okay, because pretty much Iran is looking to pretty much get his pound of flesh against Babylon the Great and against the small heads. All right, all the other propaganda throughout all these decades, all the bombings, okay, all of their leaders and their top scientists and nuclear scientists that's been assassinated over these years by the West. Iran is now in pretty much in revenge mode. Looking to get their pound of flesh against America, Babylon the Great, and as well, especially against the small heads, okay, which are at the forefront of this campaign against Iran. You see, it says the diplomatic vacuum is accompanied by a direct threat to the petrodollar. To bypass U.S. sanctions, Iran has begun collecting maritime tolls in yuan, which is the currency of China, and cryptocurrency. Because pretty much as you've been seeing in the news as of lately as well, with the Strait of Hormuz still continuing to be blocked off by the Iranian military. They're only allowing particular ships from particular countries, namely ships from countries that are outside of the United States and Israel, to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, right? But they have to deal in either Chinese yuan or they have to pay Iran cryptocurrency in order to have access to pass to and fro throughout the Strait of Hormuz. You see that? And that's just another major move, okay, And that's just another major move being done throughout the earth to bypass the dollar, okay, to deal and trade outside of the U.S. dollar, which again is another attack or threat to U.S. dominance throughout the earth, because pretty much when particular countries find ways to trade and deal outside of the dollar, that's a direct threat against U.S. dominance throughout the earth. You see that? And as the scripture speaks about in the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah 51 and verse 44, all right, which is speaking of Babylon the Great, America. Jeremiah 51 verse 44, it says, "And I will punish Bel in Babylon, and I will bring forth out of his mouth that which he swallowed up, and the nations shall not flow together any more unto him. Yea, the wall of Babylon shall fall." And so these nations are finding ways, okay, to deal and flow and trade, okay, outside of the dollar, okay, outside of the so-called U.S. dollar, the petrodollar. All right, these nations are no longer flowing to America. Okay, they're no longer flowing, all right, to America in terms of politics, okay, influence, all right, nor when it comes to trading and dealing, all right, with that dollar, all right. And as we've been seeing, over these past 6 weeks with the Iran war, okay, with Iran, dealing with the Chinese yuan and cryptocurrency, allowing particular ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, okay, that's just another blow to the U.S. dollar, okay, another move to threaten U.S. dominance throughout the earth via that dollar, all right, the petrodollar, okay. And so going back to it, it says again, this diplomatic vacuum is accompanied by a direct threat to the petrodollar. To bypass U.S. sanctions, Iran has begun collecting maritime tolls in yuan and cryptocurrency. All right, I'm gonna jump down. All right, because pretty much as it continues to go into in this article, at the end of the day, who is the main people here in America, Babylon the Great, that's paying the brunt for the dollar's influence being collapsed throughout the earth? Is ultimately the middle class, okay, the middle class and lower class, the working class, okay, the average everyday American that's already catching hell. The cost of living going up more and more, rent is going up, food is going up, right? More inflation. Okay, the price of goods and needs and essential and medical needs within these stores are going up more and more. Bills are going up. Okay, and not to mention as well, as we've been seeing over these past few weeks, gas going up. Due to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, right? And all this is going to lead to more hell being put up on the average, everyday, middle class and lower class American. Because ultimately, we know as well, according to prophecy, that this is all being done strategically, okay, to accelerate the collapse of America, okay, financially, politically, socially, right, to ultimately, to bring forth the chaos throughout America that the elites of Esau, Edom need, all right, the top banking families, to ultimately reset this whole entire American system, and as well the whole entire global system into the NWO, via the MOTB system, all right, all centered around the MOTB, the microchip, governed by technocrats, all right, via AI, technocracy, okay, social credit scores, UBIs, right, 15-minute cities, the fourth industrial revolution, 6G, right, all these things, we the hopeful elect, as scripture speaks about in Corinthians, we're not ignorant of the device of Satan, because we ultimately know what this war and this conflict is all leading to. All right, it's all leading to the MOTB system being rolled out throughout the four corners of the earth. Okay, and as well as ultimately leading to World War III. Okay, which is going to usher in the return of Mashiach Yahushai to take down all these heathen nations and their armies in the valley of Yahushua, and ultimately deliver the elect, okay, out of Babylon the Great America and throughout the four corners of the earth. Lord will not be of their number. All right. But as it goes into, I'm gonna jump down here. All right. It says the administration's wanton recklessness has alienated traditional allies in Europe and the Gulf by threatening to withdraw NATO support from nations that refuse to join the strikes. Trump has inadvertently strengthened his chief strategic rivals. You see that? So this current war with Iran is also pretty much caused a divide within NATO. Okay, it's put more of a rift between America and their NATO and EU allies, right? Caused more division within this beast system because pretty much as the United States, Babylon the Great, all right, has been as scripture speaks about in Jeremiah, the least of the flock shall draw them out. As Babylon the Great America has been drawn out to war in the so-called Middle East once again, this time with Iran, okay, by the small heads, right? A lot of these NATO and EU countries have pretty much been reluctant to aid America in war with Iran, okay, especially by the countries such as Turkey, right, which has been talking all kinds of shit against the small hats over these past few years, okay, and even looking at America with the side eye for fighting for the small hats. Okay, Spain is also another major NATO country that has been reluctant to aid America in war with Iran. All right, Great Britain, France, Germany, all right, and many more NATO and EU countries, that are allied with America in some way, shape, or form. Okay, that all pretty much make up this beast system, right? All these NATO and EU countries have been reluctant to aid America's war with Iran, okay, to make the small hat great again, and so therefore what, it's led to more of a division and more of a rift between America and their NATO allies. Okay, you got Trump, getting on these particular press conferences and these particular platforms, talking shit against NATO, right? And we know what that's all going to lead to as well. Okay, Revelation 17 is all going to lead to the beast. All right, NATO and EU hating the whore, America, Babylon the Great. Okay, and ultimately aiding and destroying this place and burning this place with fire. All right, thermonuclear fire. All right, in World War III. And as it says again, the administration's wanton recklessness has alienated traditional allies in Europe and the Gulf. It says by threatening to withdraw NATO support from nations that refuse to join the strikes, Trump has inadvertently strengthened his chief strategic rivals. Yeah, because the more and more America, Babylon the Great, under this Trump administration is pushing away their NATO and EU allies, okay, talking shit against them, right? Dogging them out in the news media, okay. The more and more that division is working in favor of America's rivals, okay, countries by the likes of Russia, China, and of course Iran, right? North Korea, Pakistan, okay, and many of these other countries that are hostile against America, right? Libya, another one, okay. So everything that America is doing, especially under this current Trump administration, it's all being done ultimately against the interests of the longevity of America, and ultimately it's all being done in the interest of America's rivals. Okay, because again, all this rhetoric that we're seeing from the Trump administration, all right, and the wars and rumors of war that's happening within Iran and all right amongst the so-called Middle East, okay, is all working against all right Esau, Edom here in America, and it's all working against Babylon the Great, Salachya, Babylon the Great and the small heads, okay, and ultimately it's all working against the favor of Edomite supremacy. You see, because real quick, all right, since we just read Jeremiah 51, let's go to Jeremiah 50 and verse 22. it says, a sound of battle was in the land and of great destruction. Verse 23. How is the hammer of the whole earth cut asunder and broken? How is Babylon become a desolation among the nations? Yeah, and for a long time, all right, especially since after World War II, America, Babylon the Great, has pretty much been the hammer of the earth. All right, the top military in the earth, right, with the the most advanced and most sophisticated weapons and bombs and air force known to mankind. All right, and if you're a hammer, right, then that means what? Any problem that you encounter looks like a nail, and therefore you treat it as a nail. Meaning what? You utterly destroy it, you smash it, you beat it down to pieces, and that's how America, Babylon the Great, has treated these nations throughout the four corners of the earth. For many decades, these past decades, especially after World War II. You see that? But now we're in a time where America, the hammer of the earth, is now being cut asunder. Okay, its military is being exposed. Okay, their bases within the so-called Middle East are being, all right, utterly destroyed. Right, the dollar is losing its influence and dominance throughout the earth. Little by little. Okay, and not to mention, all right, you even have a current divide within the U.S. military over this current war with Iran, as many of America's soldiers, all right, and even generals are reluctant to fight in this war with Iran. Okay, which is why America's Babylon, America is getting ready to roll out an automatic military draft. Okay, by the end of this year, well now they're going to force a particular age group of men and women within America to join the military and go fight in war in the so-called Middle East, which is all going to lead to their desolation when it's all said and done. Okay, because all these American troops are being sent to the so-called Middle East to wage war against Iran. Not one of them are going to come back when it's all said and done. Okay, and as I said again, Jeremiah 50 verse 23. How is the hammer of the whole earth cut asunder and broken? How is Babylon become a desolation among the nations? Verse 24. I have laid a snare for thee, and thou art also taken, O Babylon, and thou was not aware. Thou art found, and also caught, because thou hast striven against the Lord Yahweh Bashim Shai. You see that? So Yahweh Bashim Shai has America in a snare, okay, in 2026. All right. The Lord has Babylon the Great America into a snare with this whole Iran situation. Because again, America doesn't have the logistics to continue in a long war against Iran, nor does it have the military support. Because again, a lot of these soldiers are either retiring or quitting the military despite the consequences, because they know this war with Iran is all going to backfire. And as well, they know that this war between the U.S. and Iran is all ultimately being spearheaded by the small heads. You see that? And a lot of these soldiers in the U.S. military are slowly but surely, they're watching videos, they're on social media, they're looking at particular platforms, and they're waking up and seeing clearly that, that their current government, especially under this Trump administration, is all being ran and controlled ultimately by the small heads. You see that, to do the bidding of the small heads, okay, and to send U.S. soldiers to be unalived in the so-called Middle East for the interests of the small heads. You see that? So, this is all a snare that's being brought upon Babylon the Great. Okay, a snare that America cannot and will not get itself out of. Okay, the only way America is going to get out of this snare, okay, with war against Iran, war within the so-called Middle East, okay, America being isolated from its allies, all right, the only way America is going to get out of this situation is by being utterly destroyed and turned into a lake of fire, point blank, period. And that's what's going to be the end goal of all this conflict and war, all right, that America is getting itself involved in the so-called Middle East. Okay, desolation. All right. As a matter of fact, let me also get this. Let's read this in the NLT. Obadiah 1 verse 7. It says, all your allies will turn against you. They will help to chase you from your land. They will promise you peace while plotting to deceive and destroy you. Your trusted friends will set traps for you and you won't even know it. See that? So the Lord even has Babylon the Great America into a snare, even from his own allies, all right? These NATO and EU countries, okay? Because sooner or later, these NATO and EU countries, they're gonna come out publicly. Certain of their leaders are gonna come out publicly and act as if they want to, make some type of peace deal with America, right? Or try to, reconcile with America. Try to get back in on good grounds with America, Babylon the Great. But it's all gonna be to lead America into an even deeper snare, okay? To further accelerate in the destruction of America, okay? First, politically, of course, economically, socially, all right? And then it's all going to lead to, their allies, all right, the NATO and the EU, joining with countries by the likes of Russia and China and Iran and various other, nations that are hostile against America to aid in the destruction of America. You see that? All to fulfill the will of Yahweh Shema Shai upon this place. You see? And let's go back to the article. All right, it says right here, the last paragraph. It says Russia has emerged as an indispensable secret energy supplier, while China has solidified its status as the world's primary mediator. Even if the U.S. secures a favorable peace deal, the damage to the Western-led international order may be irreversible. It says Washington intended to prove it was no longer ridiculous on the world stage. Instead, it may have signaled the end of its own empire. See that? And that's exactly where we're at. That's exactly where we're at in prophecy as of 2026 going forward. We're at the end of the American empire. We're at the end of this beast system. Okay, we're at the end of the state of Israel. And ultimately, we're at the end of the blessing and the rulership of Esau, Edom, according to prophecy. You see that? Esau is the end of the world, and Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth. You see that? And as the scripture says in the book of Psalms, let's get Psalm 75. Psalm 75 and verse 6, it says, for promotion cometh neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south. Verse 7, but Yahweh is the judge. He putteth down one and setteth up another. Okay? And we clearly see right now Yahweh Shema Shai is putting down America, Babylon the Great, and the current state of Israel. Alright? And then eventually, all these heathen nations for that matter, to ultimately set up what? Okay, to set up his people. Alright, to set up his kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of Jacob. Okay, Yahweh Shai and 144,000, the tabernacle of David. This is what all, this is what the work of Yahweh Shema Shai being done throughout the earth as a result of Bible prophecy is all leading up to. Okay, the Lord taking down Esau, Edom, and all these heathen nations and their rulerships, and eventually all their armies, okay, to establish his kingdom, the tabernacle of David. You see that? And because even as Yahweh spoke of in Luke 21 verse 24, okay, the times of the Gentiles being fulfilled. We're pretty much in these times. We're at the end of Esau and these heathen ruling the earth. And we're pretty much at the time in the times where the rulership of the heathen nations is almost fulfilled. Okay, and as I said again, Psalms 75 verse 6, for promotion cometh neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south, but Yahweh is the judge. He putteth down one and setteth up another. Matter of fact, let's read verse 6, or rather verse 7 in the NLT. It says, it is Yahweh alone who judges. He decides who will rise and who will fall. All right, and we clearly see right now that Yahweh Bashim Shai has decided that Babylon the Great America is fallen, right? And the Lord's elect is rising. Okay, the tabernacle of David. Okay, through faith in Hamashiach Yahweh Shai, his begotten Son. You see that? We're literally seeing the fall of our enemy in their empire right before our eyes. Okay, and while simultaneously at the same time we're seeing the rise of the Lord's elect throughout the four corners of the earth. Okay, getting ready to be the next rulers and kings and priests. All right, on the planet Earth. All right, under Hamashiach Yahweh Shai. Okay, and let's also get this in the book of Sirach 10. Sirach chapter 10 and verse 14, it says, "The Lord, Yahweh Bashim Shai, hath cast down the thrones of proud princes and set up the meek in their stead. The Lord hath plucked up the roots of the proud nations and planted the lowly in their place. The Lord overthrew countries of the heathen and destroyed them to the foundations of the earth." See that? So the Lord is taking down these proud nations, starting with Babylon the Great. Okay, ran by Esau, Edom, the most proud nation of people to ever walk the earth. Right? And the Lord is, and Yahweh Bashim Shai is raising up the meek and the lowly to be the next rulers of the earth in the kingdom of heaven. All right, and as the Israelites, so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, starting with the elect. Okay, and more importantly, starting with the 144,000 tabernacle of David. Okay, which is going to serve as the governing body directly under Yahweh Shai Mashiach in the kingdom of heaven. Okay, Lord will not be of their number. See that? So, Salachya. So yeah. So we're literally, okay, living in the end of the American empire. We're literally living in the end of Esau's blessing, Esau's rulership. Okay, and as well the end of all these heathen nations ruling over the planet Earth. You see that? Because as a matter of fact, one more thing I want to bring out real quick before I close out. All right, as we always go into the book of Obadiah, okay, which is this whole entire chapter speaks of prophecies and judgments against Esau, Edom, right? The Lord ultimately, bringing down Esau, humbling Esau, taking down his rulership, right? But then when you go down to when we go down to verse 15, Obadiah verse 15, it says, "For the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen, as thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thine own head." Okay, verse 16, "For as ye have drunk upon my holy mountain," okay, the nation of Israel, so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, right? "So shall all the heathen drink continually. Yea, they shall drink, and they shall swallow down, and they shall be as though they had not been." See that? So what does this ultimately entail right here? That not only is the Lord going to take down, of course, Esau, Edom, the biblical nation of Esau, Edom, and Babylon the Great, and his beast system as a whole, but ultimately as well, all these heathen got to be taken down ultimately. Okay, because despite these heathen throughout the earth, rising up in battle against Esau, okay, rising up in battle against America and against the small hats, which is ran by Esau, Edom, ultimately, all these heathen, okay, have an agenda, all right, an NWO agenda to undermine the authority and the influence of Yahweh Bashim Shai. Okay, and of course that's pursuant to Psalms the second chapter. Why do the heathen rage and imagine a vain thing? Right, the NWO agenda. Okay, because these heathen as a whole, ultimately, they're all in it when it comes to the NWO agenda, but they're divided on how to actually go forward with it, because these heathen are trying to establish themselves in their countries as the new superpower to lead the NWO. Okay, as America is getting ready to be taken out of power. But you see, it's all going to lead to Yahweh Bashim Shai not only taking down Esau, Edom, and Babylon the Great, and the small heads, but all the rest of these heathen nations as well. Okay, because all these heathen got to go. They all got to be taken down, and they all got to be put in check and put in subjection. Okay, under Yahushua, the tabernacle of David. You see that? And that's ultimately what the judgment of Esau, Edom is all going to lead to. All right, judgment upon the Edomites and judgment upon all these heathen nations. Okay, by the Most High through his right hand, Yahushua, and then ultimately the tabernacle of David in the kingdom of heaven. You see that? So, yeah. So I'm pretty much ended off right there. Lord willing, this video was edifying. And until next time, shalom.